it stood, and what are our next steps? How do you want to handle this?
Right. So I think that the full body meeting that we had was on the afternoon of the evening of the conference. So it was before it actually occurred. So I guess we could just, at least for posterity, record that it did occur. We did make the presentation, right?
Yes, yes, that's correct.
And then in terms of follow-up, like where was it left in terms of that, in terms of how it was presented, and was there an expectation for follow-up, or?
Well, so what I recall from the meeting is it was presented by Michael Pearson and Tamisha Walker, who put forth the materials and took questions. And there was a little less kind of discussion about the data than I would have liked, or presentations surrounding what we were seeking to achieve or gain. But that said, the ask was made, and there was no, there was no kind of final wrap up that said, okay, what are we doing from here? And so that's what is coming back, is to say, what are we going to do from here? And I see, Jill, you might have other thoughts on this too.
I have a lot of thoughts.
Okay, please.
So the presentation was made. I didn't hear a clear ask of the presenters of the group, so I think it sort of fell flat, and it was just sort of, and so I'm not sure what follow-up should be done because it wasn't a clear ask, which was unfortunate because that was a very active and involved group.
Yeah.
Do you think that we should follow up with just thinking of how we've made a couple times, like just in writing, like a summary of what we would like? We could generate a letter, like a follow-up letter.
I think it would be, yeah. I mean, I think a follow-up letter to those cities that are not sheriff run, asking those city managers, sharing the data that you're asking for and their approval and willingness to have the sheriff provide that. Because I think that's the question, right? Like whether or not they want the sheriff to provide the information. And so I think just it's a simple yes or no. Would you be willing to allow the sheriff to release that information? And so I think it's, you're not asking them for the data necessarily, because the Aries data will provide the other information you're looking for that they may not be collecting at this point in time.
I don't know if that's true though, because aren't we asking for their officer initiated stop data?
Which is the Aries data, right, Melissa? And the smaller departments won't be collecting that yet.
The RIPA data? The RIPA data
on the personal stops, yeah.
Yeah, that's the stop data. So yes, that's correct. It was based on size of the agency when they were required to start collecting RIPA data. So that is correct. And the only other caveat, and it just depends what this group wants to ask for. Again, the booking data that the sheriff's office has is limited to just those arrests that end up with a booking in the county jail. So there are other arrests that are citations or other things like that out in the field that is not captured in the booking data.
So it wouldn't necessarily, like the data that you have access to, if you were allowed to release it, Melissa, would not include a layer of interaction that didn't rise to the level of booking. Is that right?
Correct.
Well, sort of, right, Melissa? So if they wouldn't include the cite and release.
Correct.
Right, which are considered arrests, but not
arrests
holding.
Without booking. So arrests in the field that the disposition is they just get a citation, promise to appear in court. So that's not captured in the booking data because those individuals actually don't even come over to our facility. So, and depending on the situation, like currently right now, we're still working on an emergency bail schedule. So there are a number, it's a much higher percentage now than it was pre-COVID that individuals are being site released in the field because of this emergency bail schedule that was enacted during COVID. And we don't have right now, we don't have any information as to how long that will go on for, when, when or if it goes back to the other bail schedule. So it could be a significant percentage of arrests that aren't captured. But if it goes back to the pre-COVID bail schedule, then we would capture, what we've historically captured in the past.
Anybody from the panel have any questions or thoughts about the idea of drafting a letter to follow up on the presentation?
My thought was, could it be similar in format and ask, obviously it's slightly different as to what was presented to the DA's office?
I think the benefit of, the benefits of doing something like that is that then it is really clear what we're asking. Right?
Yeah.
Right.
But I'm still a little bit confused. Maybe Chris, I know you know a lot about these things. Is it just to ask them for the sheriff's department, for permission for the sheriffs to release that, or is there another layer that we're looking for?
So I think that is a good place to start, right? Given that, part of the reason that we approached the mayor's conference in the first place was because we went to the Police Chiefs Association to ask for, this same information. And basically we're looking for support from mayors to say to those police chiefs, right, this is something that we, are in support of you doing or want you to do, or, are, authorizing you to do. And in addition to that, if there are barriers that we need to know about, right, that would keep you from being able to provide this information to the extent that you directly need to do anything, let's troubleshoot those. Just wanting to get that level of sort of executive level support. So I think that's a good place to start. It doesn't necessarily have to be the be all end all. And I think if we get something drafted, right, we can look at it and we can see if we feel like, in addition to sort of the things that we discussed today, if we need to add anything else. And while I have the floor, I'll just sort of share some sort of observations and recommendations that I have from that particular meeting. I think first and foremost, I think it's important to do, or at least, it'll be important for folks who are going to be directly involved in these sorts of presentations to do some level or have access to some level of, for lack of a better term, sort of recon about how these meetings go, how they are sort of facilitated, so on and so forth. I think that helps just to, know how to best present and, how best to sort of format the information. So I wanted to flag that because, I wasn't familiar with how the meeting would be facilitated. And we ended up talking about this in an ad hoc meeting about the upcoming listening session, community forum, where the way that it was set up, it like there were times when, if I could have, I would have, jumped in to try to make a clarification or something like that. And theoretically could have done it, but it's just, the way that it was being sort of facilitated, the format of it within Zoom I felt like I had to go see the wizard, so to speak, to kind of do that. And that's okay. That's just, it adds a different layer of, should I say something or should I just let this go? And so sort of knowing that and prepping for that on my end would have been helpful. But I also think actually the way that the meeting went and folks knowing how that was going to play out and what the dynamics of that are in that space, as opposed to say a space like, what folks are used to, would have been helpful. The next thing I would say is, so obviously we had to make a pivot in terms of who was at least one of the co-presenters sort of last minute. And there was discussion about who the right person should be or shouldn't be, and so on and so forth. And obviously we've had those conversations before, and I support, the spirit behind, those conversations and don't have any issue with that. But I would say this, we ended up with two people who, and this would have happened anyway, I guess, had both co-chairs at the time been able to present. We would have been, I believe, we would have been talking about two folks who are not on this subcommittee. And in that case, I think it would have been a little bit better because they would have had time, right? They were having, prep meetings and such in advance of it. So I think that might have been okay. But in terms of a last minute pivot, I think, we don't need formalities around it necessarily, but I think folks should really consider strongly making sure that if you're going to have a stand-in presenter, that person is from the committee that has done the work that you're presenting. Just because I think it would be easier and take a little bit less time and prep for that person to be prepared. Because in this case, like using this example, if I'm someone who shows up in these meetings and I hear Denise talk through this data and what it says and what it's showing and where the disparities are, right? On a quarterly and sometimes probably a little bit more frequently than that basis. And I know all of the context for this iteration of the presentation, how we got here, right? Because we probably started with some other draft and made some changes and all that, and I was a part of all of that. Even if I didn't take months to prepare and somebody can't fill in and I'm taking that spot, having that context is just going to make me a little bit more comfortable and familiar with the material in a way that probably is going to translate. That being said, obviously, I applaud Michael for stepping into that role. I did not think he was going to do it. I was asked to reach out to him about it. I said, I'll do it, but I'm pretty sure he's going to say no. He said yes. And I think given the circumstances and the time, he did a fine job overall, while maybe not hitting all of these points the way that maybe a person who is more exposed to these things would. And so I just think that's something folks need to think about. And the last thing I would say is definitely, I think, to I think Denise's points earlier on, right? Maybe the ask wasn't clear, but also to some degree, it felt like, after the presentation, there was kind of a moving on to the next thing without, as much robust sort of discussion or, a sense of where this was going next. And I would just pause to say to this group that essentially that would feel the same way to a person who is showing up here to make a public comment, and then they make it and you're like, thank you, moving on, right? So just remembering that, there are folks with, real needs and real concerns and real passion behind, why they show up here and say the things that they say. And so even if this isn't exactly the place, being able to say, we hear you, we appreciate you showing up. And even if this is not the place, however, we can support you in moving forward to the proper place for this item, we want to do that and make sure that, that you are heard. I think it goes a long way. And so I think we mostly do a good job of doing something like that, but just want to flag it and make sure that it becomes an intentional practice. And I'm not facilitating, so I won't, try to referee the hands that are up, but I see that 2 hands are up right now. So.
Yeah, I got it. First, before I call on either of those people, I just want to appreciate what you said, Christopher, because I think that I wasn't here at that meeting where that decision was made. And I appreciate your adding that to our future decision making, right? That's something to consider is the background and the knowledge about the process that came before the PowerPoint, because the PowerPoint was well done, well put together, had all the information, but if somebody wasn't privy to everything that went into, I mean, that's true for anything, right? You hand somebody, if you handed us a PowerPoint that was put together by, you know, somebody about how they put together cranes, like, I'm not gonna be able to talk, I'm looking at a crane, that's why I'm saying that. I'm not gonna be able to speak intelligently about that in the same level of context in terms of what the intentionality is, in terms of why it was given. I might be able to, I could read it and I can, you know, but yeah, I hear what you're saying. So thank you. And Jill, I believe your hand was up first, so go ahead.
Yeah, I would echo everything that Chris said. And to use your analogy, you don't need to understand how the crane was built. You just need to understand what the purpose of the crane is. And I think it was really deep in the weeds on how the process was built. And it really just needed to be a more clear, like, this is why we need the information. And here's some really high level stuff, because that's the group you were talking to. And understanding your audience. And I do think that there is benefit. I know there was much discussion about who presented. And I do think that there is great benefit in having somebody like Chris or Patrice present the information, because Chris is really good at explaining why we're where we are and what the process is to move forward. And Patrice is the staff person who would be following up. And so you're making that connection between the people who are presenting and the people who will be following up with those people that they're presenting to. And you're building that connection, and not to take anything away from any appointee, because I think everybody has an important role and an important voice, but you kind of have to decide what the purpose was. And it was really, I think that many of those city council members understand the problem. So it's really more about just, what do you want from them? And I think that's what, Chris, you saw happening at the flat, is they didn't know what anybody wanted from them. And so that's why there was no discussion. If there was a really clear ask, like, we want your police data, and these are these are the bullet points we want, then they could have responded, but that wasn't the ultimate ask. So I think that was, and you know, it's lesson learned. It's not like it was a waste of time. It was definitely, you know, it's out there. So now it's just follow up and how best to do that.
Yeah. Thank you, Jill. Denise?
Yeah, I would agree with everything that surrounds where this discussion has gone. I will reiterate Patrice's perspective on this, as well as the chief's perspective, given that I'm wearing her hat today, for probation via Patrice to be the voice for this data subcommittee is not good optics, even if she is the director of our office and a woman of color in the community and in this committee. We really got bogged down, I believe, by having the voice for this ask, which I think is not necessarily a complicated ask, but an ask nonetheless surrounding the details of data. We got bogged down because there was an expectation that, because this is a racial justice oversight body, data subcommittee, that the presenter needed to be an individual of color on the committee. We threw out having Becky be the presenter, who had volunteered graciously to do this, who is probably the best person on behalf of our committee do that, because she didn't fit the model expected. And that then, I think, Chris, what you're saying is it goes to what's the ask. This is not a complicated ask that has different lenses basically on it. It's a straight data ask. And I think I think that's where I feel there was a place for learning in this too. We got bogged down.
Okay, thanks, Denise. And Melissa?
The only thing that I wanted to add about the ask is I do feel that since that presentation was recently done, a follow-up in the near future would be important, so that it doesn't get out of sight, out of mind for a period of time. But my only concern, not concern, I know we're asking for data and we want data, but what are we going to do with the data? Because as I think I mentioned this I think it was last meeting, or maybe even the one before, the current data that we're pulling for our records is over, it's something like 3,000 lines of data per month. And now we have it, we just don't have the ability to do something with it. And so when we start collecting additional data from these other agencies, we can just multiply that by however many times. And the cities may, once they agree to this, they're probably going to want to see their data in action, you know, and yes, we've supplied our data and here's what they're doing with it and here's what it looks like. So I know we had a really brief sort of comments or discussion about what we're going to do with the data. And I had mentioned that our department unfortunately does not have staffing to analyze that data or put it into a usable form similar to what Denise does with the probation data. So hopefully we can continue to have discussion about that process as well.
Thank you, Melissa. I think that's a really important comment, because we don't want to be asking for things and then have the impression be that there was no real intentionality around why we're asking for that. I do think it's completely like in line with our work plan, and clearly something that from the very beginning we've been attempting to accomplish. But I appreciate what you're saying, that we, in order to make it feel successful and like improve our relationship and trust about getting information, that there should be some sort of like follow through. Does anybody from ORJ have any comments about the feasibility of doing something once we did get that data?
Well, I think the conversations right now, and Chris, you might be able to provide more information about this, but the conversations right now would be to have Burns pick up some of this initial analysis moving forward, at least for this next contract year, until we can make a determination about where these analyses fit and where the resources are going to come from in order to do it.
Okay.
Because our office, or the ORJ, has been doing some of it, but we are not equipped to do the full breadth of the analyses that would be necessary for this body, let's say.
And I do remember that there was some conversation also about the idea of one LEA holding the data of other LEAs and how that might be perceived, or the appropriateness of that. Am I remembering that correctly, or was that
Well,
about?
I think that would be a question that I would ask too, of when, if we do send a letter out, to ensure that you know, leadership has a clear sense of where this data will go, and that it would theoretically be maybe master copies of it will be held by the ORJ. And then with that being analyzed by, let's say, Burns for the next calendar year.
Okay.
And would that be acceptable? Chris,
So
do
now
you have
Chris.
anything more to say on this? Yeah.
Really simply, yeah, that's what we do. We can do that. And actually, if I recall correctly, the conversation last time we were here was, you know, that we're ready to, whenever we can get that information, you know, I usually have it in these agendas. So it's PDF, right? Like something that I can't manipulate. But that's, as long as we have it, you know, where we can actually, you know, answer it, manipulate it, right? It's in an Excel spreadsheet or something like that. We are ready to go. And I distinctly remember pointing out to you guys last time that it's not going to be me. Like this, that is not my area. But someone in the organization will do it. We've had that conversation. This person looked at it and said, "Oh yeah, I can absolutely do this."
Right.
So we're ready. We just need.
And I was in full ownership here. I was kind of holding back on sending any data to you, Chris, until we had this conversation with Melissa present. I do not feel that I have the, even though I sit on this body, have the authorization to release the sheriff's office data without Melissa's blessing. So Melissa, if you are okay with me sending these last 4 months of bookings data to Chris, I will do that. And if you need to respond back later, let me
Yeah.
know.
I will, just so that I can run this past our sheriff so that he's aware of the process going forward. He knows that we're, that right now the data is going to the ORJ. So I just want to, give him the courtesy of letting him know the process, but I will respond back in writing after this meeting.
That would be great. And then once I get your and the sheriff's, feedback, then we can move forward with Burns.
Sounds good.
Okay, this is good stuff. So the other part of that, I guess, Melissa, when you're making that ask, could you also prepare for the hopeful idea that we are going to get the permission from different police LEAs that they're okay with you releasing that too, and ask him if once police agencies do allow that data to be released, that he would be okay with you sending that data along with what you're sending already to Hayward Burns, so we don't have to circle back again. Is that okay?
Yeah, I will definitely inquire about both. And one of the things also with other agencies' data, and I don't know if we would want to specify this in the asks to the other cities, but we would not be verifying their data. We would just be whatever we collected, data in, data out. So we would just be really a clearinghouse for that data rather than any type of verification of their data, since we don't have the ability to verify their.
Okay. Well, maybe between now and the next time we meet, we can work on drafting something up and run it by you, Melissa, to make sure that it sounds like it's going in the right direction, and then we'll agendize it next time to review it and look at it with the whole body then. Does that sound like an okay plan to everybody? Oh, Denise is raising her hand.
Oh, yeah, sorry. One thing I think we should consider, and Melissa, this might be something also to follow up with the sheriff about. I recall from the police chief's meeting that the sheriff made a comment surrounding, are you willing to authorize in signature your release of this information for us to give to the ORJ? So what we might want to do is also craft a very simple data sharing agreement and put that into our letter as an attachment and ask for that signature to come back. I think that's what I recall that the sheriff wanted, and I think that makes perfect sense. It's reasonable, and I've got copies of basically a simple DSA that we can have for everybody.
Okay, yeah, that's great. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Sure.
Yeah, that same idea had been mulling in my mind as well. If we were going to reach out to them with the clear ask, why not give them what they need in order to just finish the process and return it to us so we can just do it.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
that's great. Okay, so we'll work on a draft of that. Are there any more comments from the panel about this item? And how about from the public? Anybody who's here as a member of the public have a comment or a question or a thought about this issue? Okay, seeing none, we can move to the next item on the updates, which is policing the teen brain, adolescent cognitive development. And Melissa, we have your name next to that item. Do you have an update about that?
I do. So our training division staff reached out to the company called Strategies for Youth to find out about post-certification courses that they offer, train the trainer courses and things like that. And I was concerned I wasn't going to have an update. They were a little difficult to get a hold of, might have been the holidays, but we did get a hold of them. or one of our training captains got a hold of them and spoke to them just earlier this week, actually. And so just a couple of updates. So they have actually tried to pursue post certification before and were unsuccessful.
Really?
They did not get a good answer from post why they weren't successful. So when we said, you know, we would be able to try to provide assistance just based on our experience of getting courses certified, they were like, yay, that's great. We would love to look at that. So we can certainly move forward with giving them the assistance and trying to work with our contacts at Post to try to get them Post certified, because they said they just did a class recently in Sacramento, and they've been to California quite often.
Mhm.
So what they offer, so that's one, you know, avenue that we're going to try to go down, because again, I think it would be beneficial to get them post certified, because it would just advertise it more. Agencies would be more inclined to send their officers. So they do two things. They do a training course where they just for not an instructor training, but a regular training course. It's a two-day class, can be 35 to 40 students is their max. And the cost for it, this class is fairly expensive. So they charge about $20,000 for the two-day class. So that averages out to a registration fee for, you know, about $500 per student or $550 per student, depending on the number of students. So we can certainly accommodate a class of that size. We have several training facilities, so we could provide them a training space in the county. We could put it out in our regional training course catalog, offer it up to not just our agency, but regionally to the law enforcement agencies in the county, and move forward with that. Some agencies may balk a little bit at that registration fee. It is a little bit high for 2 days. But it just depends. Like right now, a lot of agencies have money for training because they weren't able to send their folks to training for COVID. So most agencies right now have a little bit more money in their training budget. But if we can do something locally, they're not going to incur additional travel costs and things like that. They also do a train the trainer program, but it is a little bit different from the type of train the trainer program that I've been involved with before. What they do is they provide the training for a particular agency. So using the sheriff's office as an example, they travel to the agency, they gather data based on the agency's statistics, they do some employee interviews, they review the agency's policy, and they bring a psychologist over. So it's a real in-depth process. And they use that to customize a training program for the agency based upon all of those different factors. The training program, once they post the training for the train the trainer, is 4 days. It's limited to 25 students, but those students would all come from one agency, and they charge anywhere from $50,000 to $70,000 for that process. So like I said, it's different. The train the trainer programs that I've been to before, you just send representatives from different agencies, they learn how to teach it, they go back to their agency and they teach it. This is more of a customizable program for the particular agency. That, just knowing my training budget, that's a pretty high fee to devote to 25 of our employees to train. And because it's restricted to only training for our own agency, they like to offer that program. But I think from our perspective, we would probably be more inclined to go with the first option training. But those are the two things that they offer. Again, they're really excited. They're interested in coming out here. So my thought was first to work with them and see if we can get them post-certified. There are reimbursable programs through post-certification, which I don't know if they would qualify for, but that would also be a benefit because then the agencies would get reimbursed for the registration fees and things like that. So that's basically the update that I have.
Thank you so much, Melissa. That's really very comprehensive. I think we have some things to add in regards to, I'm blanking on what particular venue. Was it the JJCC data subcommittee that we were talking about this?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So now we've been giving an update to the JJCC data subcommittee about the RJOB every time we have that meeting. And so we were discussing this issue with them. And of course, the JJCC has a couple budgets that they control there that are all for prevention across the county. And so there definitely was interest amongst that group in potentially subsidizing this program. So I think that, I mean, I don't think that we can assume that cost is no barrier, but I do think that it's a surmountable barrier that is expensive, but, and I agree with what you said that the other thing the train the trainer sounds attractive, but the other one is going to get a broader, involve more people and I guess doing one doesn't preclude the other one too, right?
Right.
At a different time.
Right.
What were you going to say, Denise?
Well, it's kind of, their approach is just really interesting because a smaller police department can't possibly afford this. So no wonder they're coming to California a lot, right? So that makes sense to me. But I also wonder how come it is that we as a county can't be considered an agency as opposed to, we're all criminal justice. Why can't we say it's a Contra Costa County Criminal Justice Agency, and we train 25 of our people across distinct units, but consider it to be an agency under the Juvenile Justice Coordinating Council, let's say. I think it's about thinking outside the box in that way, and I don't know, they probably have had other people do that, but it would be really interesting to see if we couldn't push back.
We can certainly ask, and I think the reason, just in their explanation for that train the trainer program, I think the reason that they're limiting it to one agency is because they're looking at their specific policies, stats, which policies in general are very similar across the board. I mean, there are little individual differences, but for the most part, our policies that we have reflect Concord PD's policies that reflect, Antioch's and so forth. So, but we could certainly ask that, and maybe if we can help them get post-certification, then maybe we could ask for a little bit more of a favor from them if we can help get them into that program. Yeah.
Well, the other thing I was just, sorry, Denise, go ahead.
I was just going to say, that's a big feather in their cap. If your connections could get them post-certified, I mean, that would be huge, I would think, for them.
Yeah.
And so it would be nice if they could consider, law enforcement of all kinds in the county to be the same agency. And maybe probation is slightly different. I don't know what that would look like, but I know that there was conversation too that probation would go through a similar training as well. So, I don't know how to split that out. But Melissa, what I will say is that given where we are with this, that I know Patrice would like to have another conversation with you about this and where probation can be supportive and move this forward. I think it would be really great if we could find out if they would consider, in light of our assistance with post, if they would consider all of law enforcement in our county to be a single agency. That would be really helpful too.
Yeah, absolutely.
I will give Patrice an update tomorrow on what you've shared, and she will likely reach out. I'll make a connection for email for you both.
Perfect, thank you. So we'll, unless anyone objects, we'll move forward with the post certification. We'll work with them. And I don't have any understanding as to why it was denied. So we'll try to find that out as soon as possible and work with them on that process, and we'll see how that goes. And I'll just continue to report back the status on that as well.
That sounds good.
You know, it's just so interesting that they spend a lot of time here. I know they've been to Salinas and San Francisco and LA and San Diego, and LA and San Diego are not small units. And so they're clearly doing the training without the post certification. And so that's also of, you know, interest to me, but clearly getting it would be huge.
I also think that, you know, one thing that uniquely positions us that could be communicated to them is the fact that we have this body, right? And that this is coming out of an analysis already. And so it sounds like you were saying that when they bring a team and they look at all the data and the different things that are happening, like we kind of are doing that, you know? So that's maybe, and also it would give them a broader reach in regards to future trainings, right? So maybe if they are willing to look at us as one agency from that regard, then that has more people who could potentially be brought into the training, you know. So I think there's room there, and I feel confident that you will move forward with those negotiations, Melissa. Thank you for that. Okay, any more comments or questions from the panel about that item? Okay, and how about, do we have any public comments about that? Thoughts or questions? Okay, so now the community listening session, which I just heard was now we should be writing community forum. Is that correct? I heard somebody say that it's now called a community forum. Is that right? I think that was you, correct. Or Sheila.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Sheila and Christopher, do you guys have an update about that?
Yeah, so we had a planning session on Monday. We really just wanted to focus on like what's the goal of this community forum. So Chris had actually put together 3 main goals, which is one, just to let folks know like why our job got started, what were our main objectives, and kind of where we're at now, and then to go into the data piece. And then after that, we want to spend a good amount of time really having discussions on the data, if there's any questions that folks may have, and then try to really get down to some recommendations. So like just looking at the data, maybe coming up with some ideas of how we can actually track. So since we're having all these trainings, like how can we track that the training is, you know, effective and working, and are the numbers decreasing, and things like that. So let me just make sure I look at my notes. We did come up with a date, which we decided to do it February 16th, 2022 at 6 p.m. As of right now, you know, we're collecting sheriffs, the sheriff, probation, Office of Ed data. Let's see what else. And then we were kind of talking about, you know, using Jamboard, because we love Jamboard. I see some folks shaking their head like, yes. But then we are wanting to make it more intimate so that folks can actually participate and engage and don't feel like, you know, Chris brought up, you know, the mayor's conference and like having to go behind the curtains and go through the wizard to like, should I chime in or not? We want to make it more open and engaging. So we were thinking about breakout groups, but according to guidelines, like in logistics, we don't think that that's possible. So we're still kind of working out some details, but we definitely don't want to make it feel like, you know, just another meeting to go and listen and see data. We actually want to make folks comfortable, engaged. So we're thinking about doing some either a live performance, spoken word. Jeff is reaching out to Dante Clark to do some spoken word, maybe doing some video clips, and things like that. And I think that's about it. We do have another meeting, another planning session scheduled for December 13th to talk more about logistics. And then Nicole was super helpful. She sent over actually the agenda from the CABS retreat that we can use and just alter that agenda to tailor it to this community forum. So that was super helpful. And I'll pass it to Chris, and if I missed anything, Chris, please chime in. I'm trying to remember everything off the top of my head.
I think you did a really good job. I don't think I have a ton to add. I would just flesh out that sort of the goals as I had laid them out were, so obviously data and data transparency, right? Is a huge goal, making sure that, that we are sharing that level of information with folks, and also a level of analysis and interpretation of what that data is, so that folks come away with the accurate takeaways and reads of what the data does show or does say, as opposed to what it does not. And wanting to tell the story of the work that has gone into securing the data up to this point, right? Including the steps that are ongoing in terms of who we've been reaching out to, right? Some of those agencies may not be currently represented. Some of them, do not have, or don't at least believe that they have the capacity to comply with such asks right now. And if we're not saying that on some level, then people are in the meeting saying, well, why do we only have this, and where is all this other stuff that's missing? And so I think it's important to share what that work has been, what the lift has been, where the requests have been, and that those are ongoing processes, so that folks know that the intention is to share information with the community. You're sharing what you have, but you're going to have hopefully in the near future more where that came from. And then lastly, to hear, as Shayla was saying, from folks about what they're curious about, what they want to know next. There's always what we call at the Burns Institute digging deeper, right? That happens once you start with data. So generally you start here and then you keep zooming in. And so there are going to be additional questions. And so wanting to know what that is, what people are curious about, what questions or clarifications they would be requesting, as hopefully analysis gets more sophisticated and robust as we go forward, to make sure that we're able to potentially at some point in the future come back and share that level of information with folks, as well as wanting to get a sense from people, of the, I think, accessibility of the website. And by the way, if at all possible, I would love for someone to drop the link in the chat, because I always forget to bookmark it in my browser. But I really appreciate the fact that that exists. And I think wanting to share that, right? Just that, right? The fact that there is a place that you can go to find this information. And is this accessible enough? Does this work? Where are the places that we should share this, that you would be most likely to see it? The data that you see that we're presenting, how clear is it to you, right? In addition to the things that you want to know and the things that you want to discuss based on the information that we have, how clear is this, right? Where do you rate this from 1 to 10? How could we improve this and make this more accessible for you? Shayla pointed out in that planning session, that all sounds good. In addition to that, people need to know sort of who we even are. There are a lot of folks, who don't know what this body is and what it's for, and that sort of information. And so providing that background and that context in the beginning would be important as well. And she covered everything else. I mean, really, she covered all this, and I'm just saying it in a different way. So I will stop now.
Thanks, you guys. Those are some exciting updates. I wanted to just share one thing that we've used recently since we've had so many virtual meetings and classes and everything. And maybe you guys already know about this thing, but it's called Mentimeter. Have you ever heard of this? It's a way in which people can give feedback. I put a little like tutorial video in the chat where you can ask questions like in live time. And then people in the audience can respond anonymously. And then it produces like graphs with the information that people produce. So that's something that we've been using in school and in our school-based training meetings a
It
lot.
sounds like a poll, like a live poll.
Kind of,
or
but you
webinar?
design it, you can design it all different kinds of ways. There's lots of different things to it. So
Nice.
it's a, yeah, and it's free. So I'm not an expert in it, but we do have people in our office who are, but I've used it. I've participated in a lot of meetings where people have used it, and we've used it with our kids when everyone was in distance learning. So I think that sounds really exciting, and it's good you guys have a date. That's very, very good work. I know how hard that is to get to that. And I appreciate all the things you guys said about wanting to, Shayla, like making sure that people have a context for why we're here, right? Like what's happened beforehand, how did we get to this point? Why was the, what was the task force and what came out of it? And then digging into the data and hopefully getting to the point of getting some feedback from the community about how they feel. Anybody else have any comments or questions about the community forum?
I actually just, Becky had a comment to one of Shayla's comments. And well, first of all, thank you, Shayla and Chris, for providing a background. It's really great to see where you're headed with this. Given that our office, i.e. me, created those slides that are on the website, if you have any question about them or want to see what my bullet points are surrounding what those findings are, let me know. I'm happy to share. But Shayla, you had also spoken about doing some kind of an evaluation of policing the teen brain. And I just want you to know that I'm already on top of that. I'm already thinking about what is that going to look like if we are able to get there? How can we look at our arrests and in a different way as a result? So that's something that is on, it's definitely on my radar. So we'll get that one covered. And then Chris, I was wondering, and I think you might have implicitly said this, that you were going to present the data that is only on the website. Is that correct? You're not going to massage it in any other way so that it looks more accessible for the general population? What were you thinking?
That's a good question. So I'm not sure if I can do that. But what we can do for sure. So part of the reason that we moved it, you guys may remember we were thinking sometime in January 1st, and time being what time is, it became clear after a while that, hey, probably, with a couple of weeks left in the year, we're not going to be ready when we get back in January to have this. And, when I talked to, my colleague here at BI, not here because it's my own, but at the BI, about doing some data analysis for this group, what I had mentioned is, that we had been doing. So I think to the extent that we've gotten the sheriff's data, we've gotten it on I think they're maybe sending it to you monthly, but we're reporting everything else quarterly. So we do it quarterly. So there was something like that that's happening. And so what I said is, so we can probably report that on a quarterly basis like everything else. So definitely there should be, by the time that we're having this event, there should be at least that level of data. And I mean, that would also include probation as we talked about, in our planning session. So at least there's going to be some data that we would be providing that would look the way that our data looks with all of its refinements and color schemes and all of that jazz to hopefully be accessible and sort of make some sense. In terms of looking to change or give a facelift to the data that we currently have, that's a different ask. That's something that I hadn't considered. Potentially something to have another internal meeting about if we feel like we need to do that on some level. But I think at the very least, right? The probation data in terms of what the offense is, what the actual offense types are, as well as the same thing from the sheriff's office. Those are going to be additional data sets and points that will look a little bit different.
Right. Well, and I guess, as you were breaking down all the different kinds of data that we have, and we have a good bit of it, I wonder what your perspective or framework will be as you start thinking about a presentation of it, because it can quickly get confusing from the standpoint of the population, right? And I've been going through this a bit with Christina and Kimmy as we're looking at data. What are we really looking at, and keeping us grounded in that way? And so from that perspective, having a story that goes along a continuum like a decision matrix sort of framework, it might be helpful to shape that in that way. But there's maybe others that would include the Office of Ed and stuff like that, whereas the decision matrix is primarily juvenile justice. But thoughts for you to consider.
Yeah, I would just add two things. I think number one, because we have a little bit more time to build some of this out, hopefully what we can do is show you some of this before it's showtime, so to speak.
That would be great.
And get some feedback. Hopefully we can do that. That will require another conversation just to make sure that there's time to get that done. In addition to that, I would say something that we also talked about in the planning session for this particular event was making sure that folks have a sense of or an understanding of what the continuum is. And we talked about having a graphic, and these graphics already exist within the county, right, in terms of the various different decision points. And so being able to walk people through that before we even start looking at numbers and charts to say, this is what it means, to have charges filed. This is what it means, for them to be dismissed or whatever the case may be, and just making sure that folks understand where that happens in the continuum and what that looks like. And so that would be a part of sort of the introductory information, and there should be a graphic for that coming from the graphics that I think Jeff was looking at, a couple of graphics that they've used with I think trainings or similar events that they've done. So not reinventing the wheel there, but using something that that already exists within the county to make sure folks understand the various different decision points in the continuum.
And I assume you'll be presenting both adult and juvenile data, or just juvenile data, just adult data? You'll be.
Yeah, I think we have to do them both.
But that complicates things, right?
Yeah, a little. But I mean, definitely with the probation data and the sheriff's data coming in, right? Those are both of those populations sort of represented in that information. So I think, it's going to be best to present both of those, and thus to make sure when we're talking about how folks enter the system and whatever graphics we're using, that they correspond to the specific population that we're speaking to. So I think we can definitely build, visuals and a deck that's gonna split those things up. Maybe a break for questions or something in between before moving on to the next one, something like that, so that folks understand the distinction between the populations and the process.
Well, I can't wait to come. Thank you.
Okay. I think I already asked if anybody else had anything else, right? But does anybody else have anything else about this? We're good? Okay. So the next item is the letter to the DA formally requesting data. And I don't really have any update about that, except for just to say that we wanted to record that here, that we are checking in about it. We haven't received anything to my knowledge in response. Is that true? Nobody has received anything back from them, right? So we had a conversation about what our next steps would be. I don't think we were expecting to get anything back quite this quickly, but before we had the quarterly meeting last time, we had a conversation about whether we wanted the full body to follow up with the DA about the request. And at that time, it was decided that it would be better to wait to give them time to actually respond, because it hadn't been very long. And that if we hadn't received anything by the next quarterly meeting, then we would be making a recommendation to the full body to follow up with the DA about the request. Does that still seem like a good plan to everybody? Anybody have any concerns about that plan? Dr. Walker, do you have your hand up, or is that a thumbs up? Oh, you're muted.
No, I just said I agree. It's time to follow up. Yeah.
Okay. I know that they have been talking about the fact that they're going to release that independent report, right? Is it Vera report? Has anybody heard anything about the timeline for that?
I have not. I understand that it's coming out, but I'm not sure when it's going to be released to the public or to other agencies.
Okay, so we can just kind of hold for now, but know that if we don't hear anything back from them before we make our next report to the quarterly meeting, that we'll be asking them to follow up with the DA formally. Okay, any further comments or communication about that? Any public comments? Okay, and then the next item is the Racial Justice Act. So we had a conversation about this request that was brought by Emmylou to review this act in light of the work that we have here and the work plan and the recommendations that were done. So just to refresh people's memory, at the time when the original Racial Justice Task Force report was given, one of the items was to develop a oversight body for the sheriff's office surrounding their reporting. And at that time, that recommendation was not moved forward because it was found to be outside of what was legally available at that point in time. That's my understanding. I'm probably not using all the right words, but does that communicate the idea?
I think maybe there's confusion about two different issues. There was the oversight body request, but then as I understood it, and Emmylou, since you're still here, you might want to provide some further comment on
Talking
this.
about the past still. I'm talking about when the original Racial Justice Task Force made the recommendations. I'm not talking about what happened at the meeting. Like when the original Racial Justice Task Force made the recommendations, one of them, which was struck out before it was adopted, was about creating an oversight for the sheriff's office. Are we good so far?
We are.
Okay. Then, and thank you, Jill, for being here to help me along the way if I get confused here. Then that recommendation was not adopted because at that point in time, it was not something that could be done legally. Okay, thank you, Jill. So that's where we started. And then Emmylou brought to our attention that this new Racial Justice Act had been passed and that now it was potentially possible to implement that recommendation. So we had a discussion about that at the larger body. And because we had a conversation about whether this really, it doesn't really lie within the purview of the data subcommittee in order to change the recommendations of the overall body, because those were the overall body, and it wasn't part of our particular work plan. So we brought it back to be discussed at the overall quarterly meeting. And at that meeting, there was quite a bit of discussion about the conversation. And there were some ideas about potentially making a recommendation to have it move forward to other committees that do have the purview to make that sort of a recommendation. But we wanted to circle back here, Emily, with you, because we know that it came from here, from you. And we didn't want to forget to agendize it because we had said we would do it in the future. So I do want to pause now and just get feedback from, first of all, from the panel, if I've misrepresented anything or if anything's not clear. And then secondly, I'd like to hear from Emmylou in response to what was just said. Anybody from the panel have anything to clarify or add?
I think I would just say, Becky, that I'm sorry.
That's okay. No, it's fine.
I did not realize, I thought the Racial Justice Act was something that was passed several years ago and hadn't been fully implemented in our county. I'm not familiar at all with the Racial Justice Act, but that the legislation that was recently passed allowing for a sheriff's office oversight body is a different legislation. And so that's what I thought. So the lawyers in the House or those other exacting folks around policy could maybe clarify that, because I thought they were different. Maybe not.
I can't respond. I have no idea which legislates it.
I do believe I did look, there was some assembly bill that was recently, is it 256? Is that the one? Emmylou, feel free to
chime in a
help
little
us.
bit. First, I appreciate this coming back onto the agenda, and I appreciate being heard. And I think I talked so long ago, I thank you for documenting it because I can't remember exactly the issue I had brought up, but I do know that the Racial Justice Act is no longer new legislation. It's almost 2 years old, and it's a California, it's state legislation. And if there are multiple things that maybe I had spoken on, but one I believe I talked about was that it was painful for me to see that after existing for almost 2 years in Contra Costa, there is at this point one case that is going through the court system in Contra Costa involving the Racial Justice Act. And from my own experience being in courtrooms and listening to judges and whatnot, it seems like there's a lack of awareness of the act and or awareness of how to actually implement the act. And I've heard judges themselves admit that on record, that they don't know what to do with this act. And then the other thing, about the oversight body, I did see that in the language when the Racial Justice Task Force was first formed, and I saw that that was the one item that was struck out. I don't know whether or not that is something specific to Contra Costa County. I'm not a Contra Costa resident, but so I don't know. I can't speak to that.
I do think that was specific to Contra Costa County. It was one of the recommendations that came out of the task force. I wasn't involved back at that point, so I'm also doing like research and trying to figure it out. But it's there on the website where it has before the Racial Justice Oversight Body, there was the Racial Justice Task Force. I'm sure some of the people on this panel were involved in that at that time. But that's where the recommendations, from what I can pick apart from what's on the website, that's where the recommendations to create the oversight body came out of. And so that was at that time where it came out of. I'm sorry, I thought I did at one point find the actual bill. Let me see if I can do that. Does anybody else have any questions or Emmylou, just maybe like you could also, go ahead. Does somebody have a question?
Becky, I just pulled it. It's in the chat.
Oh,
It's
thank you.
Assembly Bill
very good.
2542, and it was filed with the Secretary of State September
Thank you.
30th, 2020.
Thank you, Jill.
And there's a difference though between the Racial Justice Racial Justice Act and the Racial Justice Act for All Act. So they are two separate
Okay,
legislations.
that's what I thought.
One is
Okay, got
asking
it.
for retroactive implementation of the law. So the Racial Justice Act is older. And I don't know if I spoke about the task force idea that was shot down because of questionable legal status of it, but maybe I did. So I'll reiterate my thoughts about that. I just feel like if that is something that could be implemented without any legal pushback at this point, again, based on my own experience in the Contra Costa court system, I think it would be a powerful tool to shed some transparency on inconsistencies of prosecutorial decision-making.
I think Melissa has her hand up.
Yeah, so unfortunately, I missed the full meeting in August when this was discussed, which was unfortunate. And I heard about it just for the first time in our last full body meeting. And I'll say from the perspective of our department, the Sheriff's Office, it's disappointing that this is being pushed by this particular body, especially in light of the efforts that we're currently making to share our data and to be as transparent with this group and cooperative with this group as possible. So I would say it is definitely disappointing. I understand the legislation, I understand it's there, but for this particular group to be the one that's pushing this right now it's disappointing. So I just want to share that with the group. I didn't have an opportunity to say that in front of the full group because I wasn't aware of that discussion that was being made. But before I came into this, John Loudon was part of the task force. He was a co-chair, I think, and we've actively participated with this group, I think, as long as it has been around, I believe. And I also think we've made some pretty good strides in providing data. Granted, that's raw data, and we were talking about, what we're going to do with that data. And even going as far as being a conduit for data for other agencies, we do want to continue to participate, but at the same time, for this group to push on an oversight body is unfortunate. So I just wanted to share that.
So I want to just come back around. So I do feel like there are several different things that we're talking about right here, and I think that that's a little confusing. And Emmylou, tell me if I'm hearing what you're saying. The concern that I hear you speaking about has nothing to do with the sheriff's department, but actually has to do with the judicial, the variation between the different judges in terms of that. Am I right in hearing what your concern is?
Yes, it has nothing to do with the sheriff's office. And
Okay.
Maybe not even so much the judges, but assistant district attorneys.
Okay, but like just differences in terms of the prosecution and the way in which things are handled. Okay, so
Yeah,
I don't
it
know
wasn't
how these two things got connected because they don't seem to be the same thing. But in any case, the issue of, so I want to take a pause on Emmylou's issue and come back to that in a minute. But to address the other thing, I did find the struck recommendations, and I'm going to put them in the chat, and they're extremely, like when we had the conversation in the full body, I feel like that they kind of got conflated into something that was much larger than what they actually are. Because, so here they come. It's 18 and 19, and these are the ones that were struck from the task force recommendations. They actually have to do Specifically, the first one is establish an independent grievance process for individuals in custody in the adult detention facilities to report concerns related to conditions of confinement based on gender, race, religion, and national origin. This process shall not operate via the sheriff's office or require any review of the sheriff's office staff. So that has to do with conditions of confinement, not to do with anything having to do with prosecution or the judicial process. And the second one is establish an independent monitoring body to oversee conditions of confinement in county adult detention facilities based on gender, race, religion, and national origin, and report back to the Board of Supervisors. So that has to do again with the conditions of confinement in the county jail for adults. And so I don't know how these two things got connected because I can't actually see how they are connected. Yeah, okay. That happens sometimes. So, and I do, but given those, now since we have started talking about these things that were struck, I just want to be clear that what I took away from that quarterly meeting is that we brought that back to the meeting because I think it was Cheryl who brought it up in the meeting that we had here, and we brought it back to the larger body. And then there was somebody from the county administrator's office there who was very clear in the fact that even the full body is not in a position to make something beyond the agenda of the committee that would hear that. Jill, am I tracking this correctly?
Hey, you lost me. Was it not an agendized item? Is that what happened on
Well,
that?
there was that. There was that, but it was
Yeah.
also, there was also that I think there was a recommendation that something be placed on the Public Protection Committee agenda, which is not in the purview of the RJOB to set the agenda for that group. That's how I understood
right.
that
You're
conversation.
right. So the RJOB as a whole could make a recommendation after an agendized item and a discussion as to whether or not they want to take up 18 and 19 and make a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors to either enact that or re-review that. But no, they can't say, Paul Race, go put that on the Public Protection Committee agenda. That's the Board of Supervisors purview to do that.
Right. And he was the person who was there, so he knew that because that's, yeah.
Right.
So I think that, especially since Emily is saying that that's not even where her concern lies, I feel that perhaps we could put a ribbon on this one and tuck it away. Denise or Chris? I
Well,
know
which one are we putting a ribbon on?
18 and 19.
So kind of the oversight body one.
The part that Melissa just expressed her concern about,
Right, okay,
that
right.
we're not even, I don't even think that's not even what the issue actually was from us. From what
Yeah,
I understand to be what somehow Emmylou's public comment that we were trying to address got connected to this other thing, and then that thing took off and went flying somewhere.
It went viral.
It went viral.
It
But
did.
what I'm interested in doing, like, I feel like we've done our part by, even if, we brought that back to the larger body, and that's for them to decide anyways. So that's like, does anybody feel like there's anything else we need to do about 18 and 19 in this group right now?
I just want to say, from my perspective in sitting in all of these meetings, Melissa, that I want to be clear that I have never considered that this body, the data subcommittee, has been pushing an agenda that is about, about your concerns, that basically that we're not playing ball or the sheriff's office is not playing ball and stuff along those lines. I certainly don't feel that way. And, the broader oversight body may have pressure coming from the community and other groups. But I just want to be clear that as a unit of this, that I have never felt that way. And so anyway, and I think the other part with the Racial Justice Act, that came forward several months ago from my memory, that none of us had expertise in Racial Justice Act. We were going to look for somebody in order to do that. Chris was going to bring somebody on board to help us understand that better. And then it was brought to my attention that, what are you guys doing as a data subcommittee? This is not like data subcommittee mandate. And this then needs to go back some other mechanism for Emmylou to say, I really appreciate your concerns, but that's not the reach of our work here.
But I don't even think that's what she was trying to bring up. So I agree with everything that you said, Denise, but I think that we brought, that did come up at some point. Somebody did mention that. I don't think it was Emma Lou now is what I think it got combined with Emma Lou's, which I do want to circle back to that. Sheila, I see you have your hand up.
And I was just gonna echo what Denise had just said about some of this push is actually coming from community, because when the Racial Justice Task Force got started, and that was a recommendation, was for the, oversight. Me being a co-lead on the Racial Justice Coalition, this is something that community has asked that the Racial Justice Coalition push through the Racial Justice Oversight body. So that's just one thing I wanted to put out there. But we do
Sheila.
appreciate the sheriff and, giving us data and all that stuff.
Well, Sheila, that helps to kind of unpack where it came from, which is helpful. So, and I do think that, I think that what the clarification that I've been trying to make is that it's nothing that we as the data subcommittee have the purview to make a recommendation about. So that's why we moved it forward to the full body, because they would be the people, as Jill clarified, that would be able to make such a recommendation for a potential inclusion on the appropriate agenda so that it could be considered. Okay. That was a little confusing. Christopher, you had your hand up at one time. Are you okay?
Yeah, so thank you for recognizing that after I gave up, several minutes ago. I did. I will just say really quickly, two things. So first and foremost, to the points that were just being made, right? It wasn't even this subcommittee that raised this for the body, right? That came from, if you got to tie it to a subcommittee, it would have been community engagement and funding, right? That lifted that item basically to say, we know. So the issue was, is this legal to do? Because of some, legislation, we now know it's legal to do something like that. So just wanted to, to actually enact those recommendations that would have been a part of the original mandate, as you might consider the 20 or so recommendations that we have, because the only discrepancy or concern about whether or not to implement them was the legality, and that was no longer a question. So that's where it came from. I definitely did not get out of, and I mean, I also was not there for Racial Justice Task Force conversations, but I was there when this happened, in an earlier quarterly meeting, and it definitely did not seem to come from a place of, we don't trust the sheriff's office, or we think that they're not being straight with us, and so this is an attack on them or something that we want to use against them, as much as, again, something that, Shayla just pointed out, the community is saying, hey, we just want, for there to be some unbiased third party that reviews things in the event of a dispute or an issue. So that's where that came from. That's how that was lifted. That's how it moved. It actually did not move from the data subcommittee. And I also don't think the spirit of it is, sort of this gotcha attack on any agency. It was just a community ask for, a third party review of, certain incidents that arise.
Thank you for clarifying that. I appreciate it, Chris, because I obviously had lost the thread of what had happened there. So I really appreciate you bringing back the actual facts of what happened. Okay, anything else about 18 and 19 there? Okay, I want to get back to what Emma Lou had brought up, because I do think that that is related to the asks that we have made from the district attorney about those decision points, and the data that if they were to respond and give us what we're asking for, then that would give us an opportunity to look at the issue that I believe that you're trying to bring up, Emma Lou. Does that seem to make sense?
yes, I think if just the Racial Justice Act and the Racial Justice Act for All were more present on the collective conscious, then we would be more efficacious in reaching our goals of this committee body in general and its subcommittees. So, yes.
Yeah, and I think that if we're able to look at disparities that are occurring at each point along that decision point matrix that Denise has brought around a couple of times, then that would lead us to identify if there were issues that were happening at different points. And one of those might be that point that you're discussing. And so then I think that the plan is that once we have that data and we can identify that, then that would allow us to drill down more into those particular areas where we see that there is a disparity. So I guess I'm just saying that from what I hear you saying, Emmylou, I feel that we have taken a step to try to get the data that we would need in order to move forward on that. Okay. No, Denise is shaking her head no.
No.
Okay.
I don't think so, because Emmylou, what I understood is that you were concerned about individual district attorneys and individuals within a particular decision point matrix. We have not asked for that data, and it was clear to me when we discussed this previously that Melvin was opposed to even asking for it because he felt like, well, he had great confidence that probation wouldn't give that to anybody. And I'm pretty confident the sheriff's office wouldn't give any information about their individual law enforcement officers to the public or make that out there. So we would have to get at that in some other way. And I don't know what that is, but my sense is that, Emmylou, that's what you were looking for, is that individual district attorneys were kind of, not following practice, basically. And you wanted to have more of a sense of what the differences were at an individual level. Is that correct?
Yes, I mean, I think all data can, because the spirit of the Racial Justice Act is that data can be used in court by a defense attorney to show that race has been an issue in the prosecution of an individual. So on one hand, all data and the transparency of it is useful, but I did at one point say that in my experience, I've also seen that there are great discrepancies in the assistant DA's practices and that they are not abiding by Ms. Becton's provision. I mean, they're, so, yeah, so both.
I think it is just a different way of perhaps looking at it, Denise, because of course, we're not going to be able to get down to that level. Just like when you have data about student performance in a school, you're never going to see a list of like, you know, Mrs. X is a terrible teacher because she, you know, whatever, right? But those trends and a disparity, I mean, I guess it's information for self-improvement for the organization itself, right? So that if they see and they know that people are viewing information about the variation in outcomes and they can see themselves, all those people are potentially, all those dispositions are coming from one particular person, right? So it's not going to be for us to do that, but I guess like in the spirit of continuous improvement, that would give them data that they could then, you know, to identify the trends. So but yeah, I thank you for bringing that up, Denise, because I don't want Emmylou to have, a misunderstanding. I didn't mean that we're going to be able to provide that individual information, but I do think that we're asking for the things that will help to draw out any systemic disparities that exist in those different decision points, which will then provide information to the actual agencies to improve themselves and, you know, address that. Okay.
Thanks, Becky.
Thank you, Denise.
I'm very exacting today for some reason. I'm not sure.
I know what you mean. I get like that sometimes.
I would just add really
Yes.
quickly that I had talked about having someone from the BI, sort of present on this, which I think is needed, right? In terms of just making sure we understand sort of what the Racial Justice Act is. It's the same person who would be doing that data on a quarterly basis. So I think it makes sense to have it happen, when that, data would be ready, or when that data would be presented, which would probably be, I think, the February meeting or something like that. So
That's the next full body meeting to present it there.
we didn't talk about that. I mean, we can do it there. I think it probably, it may make more sense to have it happen there. So we can, I'm sure we can swing that. I'll just, have to have another, I'm sure she loves hearing from me at this point, because I always have new things for her to do, but she's usually gracious enough to find a way. So I think we can do that, and that would be the same data that we'd be looking to present at the actual community forum as well. Not the Racial Justice Act presentation, but I'm saying at the same time, she'd be able to show you the data that will be used in that presentation.
Okay, that's great. So we will make sure to agendize that for the February meeting. And let's see, I've now opened a couple things on top of the agenda. Let's see if I can go back to it. Any public comment about this issue or any more feedback from the group? Okay. I'm trying to find the agenda. Here it is. Okay, so the next thing is Christopher, you. Item 5, discussion. How do we measure race, ethnicity in the criminal justice system?
Hi, Daddy. Hi.
Okay, so what I think this is coming from is my pesky reminder to you all when we start talking about training around sort of adolescent development and how to interact with and engage with and hopefully build relationships with young people, right, from a law enforcement perspective. And my pesky reminder being, that's a great gap that we've identified. I support doing that. But in terms of the work plan items, when it's talking about training, it seems more specifically worded toward training around data collection and reporting, which might make just a little bit more sense. And so probably also a good idea, if we haven't already, to make sure that folks at the full body level have a sense of where we are with training and can ask whatever questions or give whatever feedback they would have for that. But in terms of training around race and ethnicity data collection and reporting, wanting to try to develop a practice of uniformity as much as possible in the county around that, as well as not just any uniformity, but uniformity regarding best practices, right, for how you collect and report that information, making sure that that to the extent that we can, at least we can provide resources, support, training, such that folks at least have the information around why it's not a good idea. Not saying that anyone is doing this, but I don't know that I don't know either way why it's not a good idea to try to eyeball, right, race and ethnicity, which is something that we do see. Something that I've seen in various other jurisdictions. We don't ask, people don't self-report their race and ethnicity. We look and we kind of decide for them. As well as sort of how you codify those things, right, if you're going to be sharing data. So just bringing that up always. I mean, I've been doing it since we started having this conversation, not because I think it's a bad idea to gain a better understanding of how to, you know, correctly and properly and appropriately engage with young people. That's a great thing that certainly we need, but wanting to make sure that we don't lose this, you know, sort of work plan objective to provide some level of training to help develop uniformity around data collection and reporting practices. That is something that I would like to see this group potentially take on at some point in the future. Sorry for background noise. And that's something that the Burns Institute could absolutely and will absolutely support you in doing. I think it may make sense to hold off in hopes that we get more participants first, because I don't know how many folks would want to attend a training session like that if they don't currently share or aren't currently in the process of collecting and sharing data with this group. And so there would, you know, need to be a number of things, you know, done in terms of just that process, as well as making sure that the right people are there to actually be able to sort of implement any changes that would be necessary, so on and so forth. Scheduling, getting the word out to the right folks in the right agencies. But you know, that's something that is in the work plan related to training. So when we start talking about training, it's something that always comes up for me and that I pointed out a few times. And I think that's why, you know, that sort of sentence for me is on the agenda. I think, you know, as we continue to roll out that participation in sharing data is something that will come more and more into view, and hopefully, you know, whether it's later this year or sometime, you know, shortly thereafter, that's something that we could actually think about hosting and having people attend to get, you know, some level of uniformity around the practice.
Great. I think that makes a lot of sense in terms of, like, you know, we are at the close of our last meeting of the year and thinking about next year. And that's certainly something that, yeah, it's definitely on our work plan. And I just want to say, you know, I did recently go through a process myself, thinking, how did we come to be thinking that we're offering this cognitive adolescent development? And I just want to remind everybody that when we did look at that composite data that is on the website, that, you know, it's the intersection of structural racism and a misunderstanding of young people, or whatever it may be. But the proof is in the numbers, and that, you know, African-American people are disproportionately represented in both youth and in adults for both misdemeanors and felonies, but the disparity is much larger for youth. And so I think the thought was, you know, just to bring it back to where we were, is that it's that intersection of misunderstanding regular cognitive adolescent development and also those structural factors. So it's not, I know, because the county superintendent asked me too, why I read through the work plan, and, you know, I'm here as her proxy, and she's like, how did we come to that point? So I had to go back through and try to figure out why it was that we got to that point. So that's what I determined based on the things that we've talked about. But I agree with you that in the work plan, it definitely clearly states that we should be providing technical assistance to the police LEAs about the way in which they're collecting that data. But I also agree with you, Christopher, that it's hard to do that until we actually have the data from them in order to intelligently respond to that. So we're on our way there. Any other comments or thoughts about that? Denise? You're muted.
My apologies. I wonder if it wouldn't be worth considering developing like a table of all the agencies we get data from, with an indicator that identifies how they're currently collecting race and ethnicity data. Is it self-report? Is it eyeball? What is it? And then I would really like to know what are the best practices surrounding this before we go into start training. What are they, and what's working now in other jurisdictions? And what is it, if we have a table and we know what's working and why in other jurisdictions, we can make kind of a target where we want to focus that training. just a thought. I mean, my understanding is that a lot of the data that comes from probation is eyeballed.
Yeah, so I think those are good questions. Definitely on the best practices end. I mean, I think that's a conversation that we can have in depth. Now, I don't want to put that on our resident expert in addition to all the other stuff that I'm already going to hit her up for say February. But at some point in the near future, even if she's not available, that should be something that we can pull together some resources to share with you all at an upcoming meeting. We can definitely do that. And it's not even just, so the eyeball thing was sort of one example, right?
Right.
There are a number of best practices in terms of how you ask the questions, and do you use a two-part question, right? Do you recognize that race and ethnicity are different things, and one could have one could be a Black Latino person, right? And so are you asking about ethnicity, right, which in a lot of cases is Hispanic origin or not, in addition to asking race? And then how do you isolate race and ethnicity with that nuance in mind, right? So those sorts of conversations, that sort of detail is a part of that conversation, a larger part of that conversation than sort of the obvious, probably you shouldn't eyeball it, right? Like, we don't even need to have a whole training around that. We kind of get it. I think at least in this group, we sort of understand that. But some of the more nuanced, processes around collecting and then reporting that data in an accurate way, that just helps to get more accurate insights that hopefully result in policy and practice changes that are more tailored to the groups that it needs to serve in ways that create impact.
Well, I wonder too, if it wouldn't be worthwhile, like Melissa, for example, or some other law enforcement agency representative, speak to what do they do, and find out more about that, why they do it the way they do it, and get some brainstorming with our partners surrounding how we can move this forward. Because I'm not familiar enough with the booking process and things along those lines to understand what that is. And I think that would be good input to have.
Melissa?
Just in response to that, I was going to say that a couple of things. There's probably a variety of ways that data is collected. Anything from asking the person to reading what's off their driver's license and just inputting that onto your booking sheet or your police report, to making that your best estimated guess. And the other thing is, I'm guessing that right now agencies aren't tracking how they're identifying that information. Now, RIPA does, because RIPA is all based on the officer's observations and what they perceive that person's race and ethnicity to be, so that as that data comes out, we'll know the source of it. But I'm just thinking back to my own personal experience. Usually, we're always asking for an ID card, and we're taking down the information on the ID card. And most often we'll utilize that information if it's there, just because we're assuming that that person offered up that information to begin with when they got their driver's license. Only if you see something that's really out of whack, maybe their eye color doesn't match, or other physical descriptors you think doesn't actually match the person, you might go through and start asking them more information. But yeah, those are two things. Now, it's certainly something that could start being tracked moving forward. And I think that is a really interesting discussion to have. And I know I would be very interested in hearing best practices. And I know, Christopher, you said you don't want to put too much on your expert's plate. So maybe down the road, I think that would be something interesting to look at. But my guess right now is it comes from a lot of different sources, and probably agencies would not be able to provide that information to you right now, because when we do write a police report or fill out a booking form, there isn't a line that says, where is this information from, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that that probation does more than eyeball it, because I know that, well, we have our own information too, so I guess I shouldn't assume that, but like, we have people who are listed in things that I don't trust that people would be able to discern, like somebody, like, you know, most people on the street, like random people, aren't really skilled at determining things that I know that is in the system, you know. So I think, but that might be coming from our school data, because from our school data, we do have a structured way that all schools collect that data by self-report. So that is potentially where that's coming from. But while we're on this issue, I do want to say that even like in our, like what we do for school, we do absolutely ask a two-part question where they ask, you know, are you Hispanic or Latino? And then they ask for your race. But there's no place for people who are Hispanic and Latino and not white or Black to register themselves. Like my husband, like I always watch him fill out that form, and the first one's real easy, and then the second one, it's like,
Right.
he's not any of those things. He's indigenous Mexican. There's not a box for that. And he knows because he's done his DNA. He's 6% Black and 6% white, and the remainder is indigenous Mexican. There's no box. And that's a lot of people who live here that are not getting registered correctly in there. So I understand the issue for sure. Okay, anything else about this? We have only 4 minutes left. Any public comment? Okay, the only thing we have left here is to talk about membership for 2022. Oh my gosh, I can't believe that year is now, very soon. And I think that this was just to see if anybody was planning not to continue on the committee. Is that right, Denise, and Chris, what we talked about?
Yeah, is to see, does anybody have a desire to move to another committee? Is anybody planning to retire from our job? Or are you still kind of committed to this subcommittee and the overall body? What, not that you wouldn't be committed if you decided to retire from our job, but just.
Just so we would be aware of
everybody.
any upcoming vacancies so that we could fill them. And also, I just would like to offer it up if anybody else is interested in being the chair. I'm happy to hand the torch to somebody else too. I'm also happy to keep doing it for as long as no one else has expressed that interest, but yeah. Okay, you guys don't have, maybe people don't feel comfortable to say it like publicly too, but if you are planning
Oh,
to not,
that's true.
if you are planning not to continue, or if you would like to be considered to take my place as the chair, you can send me an email. How about that? And then we can follow up about that. Okay. And then next steps, we kind of went through a lot. I have a lot of things written down here, and I'm so thankful that we record these things because sometimes it's a little tricky. I have tried to summarize at the end, but I think that we talked about drafting a letter to follow up with the mayor's conference about what our ask was. And so we can work on that, and Melissa, I'll run that by you before we come back to the larger body, make sure that it makes sense on what we're saying that you guys would do. And then Melissa, you are going to talk to the sheriff about the feasibility of Denise passing the data that is already getting passed to her to Hayward Burns.
Yep. And
Melissa, you're going to follow up with the provider of the training about potential post-certification. You're going to keep working with them with that. And then are you going to actually ask them for a proposal for the training that you discussed, or are we not quite at that point yet?
Absolutely. I mean, we can move forward with some of that, but I do think some of it will be based on whether they get certified or not, only because that can change reimbursements and things. But
Right.
But yeah, we'll start working with them.
Yeah, I think it's worthwhile because we do have a potential funding source from the JJCC, the JJCPA and the YBG money. So
Yeah,
I think it's worth asking for them to at least begin that conversation. And then in terms of the community forum, you guys gave such a nice update. And I think that that's not going to happen before we meet again. But I don't know if there's anything else. If you guys, I mean, just let us know if you want to agendize anything about that, or else we'll check in after it happens at the meeting after the next one. And Chris, you're gonna talk to the woman in your organization who's going to come to our meeting. Did you say in February? Because we have a meeting in January too.
Yeah, because I think we said it might be better to have her sort of speak to these things at the quarterly meeting.
Oh, okay, okay.
Full
That's
body,
gonna be for the
right.
quarterly. Got it, got it. That's why I wrote down February. Okay, thank you for reminding me. And then you were also gonna ask her to potentially present about something else, which was, let's see,
Racial Justice Act.
the Racial Justice Act.
And best practices. Yeah, we've got a long list.
Yeah, except that one, where I'm not gonna put it on her to do that necessarily in February, because I think that's.
So February was just the Racial Justice Act, and then the other one is later, the racial.
Racial Justice Act and new data, right? Assuming everything is cleared, you know, with
Yes.
the sheriff's
Oh,
office
right.
for that data.
Thank you. I knew there was one more thing. Okay, so at the very least, the sheriff's office data, hopefully if that gets pulled through. Okay, good. And then moving for later is talking about the race and ethnicity reporting. That's later, next year. Anything else that I missed there?
I'm gonna pull together a model or an example DSA and send that to Melissa for the work, get the sheriff's approval on that, and then we can
Yes.
send that out with the body.
I missed that part. I went
That's
straight to
okay.
Melissa
No
talking to the
worries.
sheriff about it, but you're right. You're gonna do that first. Thank you. Thank you, Denise.
Thanks, Denise.
Okay. Anything else? For the good of the community? All right, well, if seeing none, public comment, anybody else have anything to say? Thank you guys all for being here. I really appreciate our group. I feel so proud of us when we go to the quarterly body because everyone's so engaged and involved. So I really appreciate our group. We're straight A students here, so definitely. All right, and we don't have a meeting in December because it was scheduled for I think the 23rd or something like that. And we will all hopefully be in the rest period between this year and the next one. But we'll see you guys on the 27th of January. And we don't know whether that will be like an in-person meeting yet or anything, right? That's too far in the future.
It's too far in the future, but as an epidemiologist, with the Omicron thing going the way it is, I think we're still going to be virtual.
All right, well, we'll see where
So
we're at, right?
That's my best bet. But
All right, well,
no indication yet.
it's my son's 7th birthday today. He already had his first shot and he's getting his second one on Saturday.
Oh,
so
yay, way to go.
Very excited
Bravo,
for that.
bravo.
All right, you guys, thank you so
Well,
much.
thank you, everyone, and happy holidays to all of you. It's, as Rebecca said, it's a great subcommittee, and I certainly enjoy working with all of you. So I hope you all have a safe and healthy holiday and come back rested, because clearly Becky has a long list for us.
It's not me, it's everybody. We're all making a list.
I know. I'm joking. I'm pulling your leg.
Okay, it's okay. I'm kind of used to it, so, okay. All right, have a great holiday, you guys, and we'll see you in 2022.
All right, bye.
Bye.
Thank you.